The sky darkened, as if the whole world was mourning. Have you ever felt abandoned? Completely alone? Imagine hanging between heaven and earth, struggling to breathe, while the very people you love mock you. The air is thick with dust and the stench of blood. A hammer swings down, cracked. Agony shoots through torn flesh. The crowd erupts, some jeering, others weeping. A mother watches, her silent sobs swallowed by the storm overhead. Lightning flashes. The earth trembles. And yet, he remains, arms stretched wide, held not by nails, but by love. Jesus sits at the head of the table, his gaze distant yet piercing. He lifts a piece of bread, his fingers trembling, not with fear, but with knowing. This is my body, he says, breaking the bread. His voice is steady, yet sorrow clings to the words. The disciples watch, some confused, others uneasy. They have followed him for years, witnessed miracles, felt the fire of his words stir their souls. But tonight feels different. A deep breath, a pause. He lifts the cup. This is my blood poured out for you. The words hang in the air, thick with meaning. Across the table, Judas' fingers tighten around the small pouch of silver hidden beneath his cloak. The weight of it feels heavier now. He looks up, meeting Jesus' eyes that see everything. A shiver runs down his spine. Outside, the wind shifts. The storm is coming. The night air is thick. The scent of oil lamps and roasted lamb, still clinging to Judas' robe as he slips away from the upper room. His heartbeat pounds his ears, drowning out the distant voices of his friends. 30 pieces of silver. The weight of betrayal jingles softly at his side. His footsteps quicken. Every shadow along the path to the high priest's house seems to stretch toward him, whispering, accusing. He clenches his jaw. This is necessary, isn't it? Jesus forced his hand. He could have fought back against Rome, could have claimed the throne he deserved. But no, he spoke of death, of sacrifice. Caiaphas awaits, his face unreadable beneath the golden glow of the torches. The temple guards stand like statues, their hands resting on their swords. You know why I'm here, Judas says, his voice hoarse. The high priest watches him for a long moment before nodding. A servant steps forward, holding a small sack of silver. Judas reaches out. His fingers brush against the cold coins. And in that moment, something shifts inside him. A whisper in his soul, distant, almost drowned by the clinking metal. But it's too late. Caiaphas smiles. You will know when the time is right. Judas nods, slipping the silver into his robe. He turns, stepping into the night. A gust of wind rattles the olive trees. The storm is closer now. The Mount of Olives looms beneath the darkened sky, its ancient trees swaying in the wind. The disciples followed Jesus in silence, their robes rustling against the dry earth. The air is heavy, thick with something unspoken. Gethsemane, a place of refuge, a place of prayer. But tonight, it feels different. Jesus stops, turning to his disciples. His face is pale, weary. But there is something else in his eyes, a sorrow so deep it seems to swallow the night itself. Sit here while I go and pray. They nod, settling onto the cool ground, exhaustion creeping into their bones. Peter, James, and John follow him a little farther, the weight of the moment pressing upon them. Jesus stops again, his breath uneven. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. The 3 disciples exchange uneasy glances, but nod. They've never seen him like this before. Jesus steps away, falling to his knees beneath the gnarled branches of an olive tree. His hands grip the rocky ground as he looks upward. Abba, Father, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me. Yet not what I will, but what you will. His voice trembles. His body shakes. Sweat beads on his brow, thick, red, like drops of blood. The weight of sin, the weight of the cross. It crashes upon him, pressing him to the earth. He rises unsteadily and returns to his disciples, only to find them asleep. Simon, he calls, voice hoarse, are you asleep? Couldn't you keep watch for 1 hour? Peter stirs, blinking away sleep. Shame flickers across his face. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Jesus returns to his place of prayer. Again, he falls to his knees. Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. He groans, pressing his forehead into the earth. The storm above groans with him. Once more, he returns to his disciples. Once more, he finds them asleep. A third time, he prays. And when he rises, there is no more hesitation, no more trembling. A new sound fills the garden. Footsteps, voices, torches flicker through the trees. The time has come. The rustling of leaves, the crunch of hurried footsteps on the rocky path. Flickering torchlight cuts through the darkness. Jesus stands, his face calm, though his chest rises and falls with deep, steady breaths. His disciples stir, confused by the sudden commotion. Peter rubs his eyes, barely awake. John's heart pounds. Then they see them, Roman soldiers, temple guards, and priests moving like a flood, their armor glinting in the firelight. Leading them is Judas. He walks ahead of the guards, his face pale but set with grim determination. His eyes flicker toward Jesus. Just for a moment, something in his expression falters. But there is no turning back. He steps forward, close enough to smell the sweat and sorrow on Jesus' skin. "Rabbi," he says, voice barely above a whisper. And then he kisses him. Jesus does not recoil. He does not resist. Instead, he holds Judas' gaze. "Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" The words slice deeper than any blade. Judas swallows hard, stepping back as the guards move in. Hands reach for Jesus, gripping his arms. The disciples jolt awake, confusion turning to panic. Peter reacts first. His hand finds the hilt of his sword, and before anyone can stop him, shing! The blade flashes in the firelight. A cry of pain. Blood sprays against the dirt. A man stumbles back, clutching his ear. Malchus, the high priest's servant. Jesus turns sharply. "Stop. No more of this." Peter freezes, breath heaving. Jesus kneels beside Malchus, his fingers gently touching the wound. The moment his hand lifts, the ear is whole again. The bleeding stops. The guards hesitate, some looking at each other uneasily. Even Malchus stares, stunned. Jesus rises, turning to the soldiers. "Am I leading a rebellion that you come out with swords and clubs? Every day I sat in the temple courts, and you did not lay a hand on me. But this is your hour when darkness reigns." The disciples look at one another, fear rising in their chests. Then, like sheep scattered by a wolf, they run. Jesus does not. They bind his hands. The ropes tighten. The night swallows him whole. The fire crackles, casting flickering shadows against the stone walls of the high priest's courtyard. The night is cold. A bitter wind weaves through the gathered crowd, chilling Peter to the bone. He stands at a distance, heart pounding, his hands outstretched toward the fire. The warmth does little to calm the storm raging inside him. Inside the house, beyond the courtyard, Jesus is being questioned, shouted at, accused. Peter can hear the muffled voices, the rising tension. Every word feels like a nail driven into his soul. Then, "You also were with Jesus of Galilee." The voice startles him. He turns. A servant girl, her face illuminated by the fire, watches him closely. Her eyes narrow, recognizing him. Peter's breath catches. His pulse pounds his ears. "I don't know what you're talking about," he mutters, shaking his head. He pulls his cloak tighter around himself and steps back into shadows. Moments pass. The voices inside grow louder. Jesus is silent, his body bruised from the soldier's hands. Another servant looks at Peter. "You are one of them." Panic grips his chest. His throat tightens. "I am not," he snaps, stepping farther from the fire. His voice is harsher than he intended. People turn, watching him now. Time slows. Jesus is being struck inside, a guard's hand striking his face. Peter clenches his fists. His breath quickens. Then, "Surely you are one of them. Your accent gives you away." This time, there is no escape. The words feel like shackles. A final accusation. "I swear to you, I don't know the man." His voice echoes through the courtyard. The words burn his tongue. His own voice feels foreign, as if someone else had spoken. Then, a sound. A rooster crows. Peter stops breathing. Slowly, his gaze lifts toward the house. And there, through the crowd, through the torches and guards, Jesus looks at him. Their eyes meet. No anger, no condemnation, just sorrow, just knowing. Peter stumbles backward. His chest caves and his realization slams into him. The weight of his words crushes his soul. The same mouth that once swore die for Jesus has now denied him 3 times. Overcome, Peter turns and flees into the night, and he weeps bitterly. The sky remains dark, though dawn threatens to break. The high priest's courtyard is behind them now, and Jesus has been dragged to the narrow streets of Jerusalem, bound and bruised. The religious leaders, their robes fluttering with each hurried step, push him forward. The temple guards grip his arms tightly, as if holding a dangerous criminal. Their destination, the Roman governor's palace. The air is cold. A crowd has begun to form, whispers spreading like wildfire. Some rub the sleep from their eyes. Others, drawn by rumors, watch from a distance. Inside the governor's hall, Pontius Pilate stands waiting. He is not a man who enjoys being woken at dawn, especially not for quarrels of the Jews. Jesus is brought before him. The chief priests and elders begin their accusations at once. He stirs up the people, one shouts. He claims to be a king. He says he will destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Pilate raises a hand for silence. His gaze moves to Jesus. He expects fear. He expects pleading. But Jesus stands there, his face bruised, his hands bound. Yet there is something unshaken about him. Are you the king of the Jews? Pilate asks. Jesus meets his eyes. You have said so. Silence. The chief priests shift uncomfortably. Pilate studies Jesus carefully. Do you not hear how many things they testify against you? Jesus does not answer. Pilate leans forward, intrigued. In all his years of ruling, he has seen many men beg for their lives. This man does not. He glances at the religious leaders. Their faces twisted in fury. He knows they're type, jealous men, threatened men. He sighs. This is no Roman matter. Take him to Herod. The guards yank Jesus forward, dragging him away. The storm in the sky swirls. The day is not yet over. The crowd has grown. The streets are packed with people pressing against each other, waiting, whispering. Some are here out of curiosity, others out of hate, and some are just waiting for blood. Pilate stands before him on the stone pavement of the Praetorium, frustration etched into his face. He glances at Jesus, still silent, still bruised. Then, at the religious leaders, their eyes burning with demand. He exhales. This man is innocent. He knows it, but the crowd is restless. Then an idea, a way out. Every year at the Passover, it is custom to release a prisoner, a gesture of goodwill from Rome to the people. Pilate is just a man, a murderer, a rebel, a man stained with the blood of Rome itself. Barabbas, he signals to the guards. Within moments, the gates groan open and a man is dragged forth, filthy, wild-eyed, his wrists still bound in shackles. The crowd stirs as he stumbles forward. Pilate steps between them. Whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas, or Jesus who is called the Christ? The murmurs grow. Some in the crowd shift uneasily. The chief priests move swiftly, whispering, weaving through the people like snakes. Barabbas, a voice calls out. Another joins. Give us Barabbas. Pilate's stomach twists. He turns back to Jesus, standing there, silent. Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ? The response is immediate, loud, almost unnatural. Crucify him. Pilate's throat tightens. He looks at the crowd, then back at Jesus. Why? What evil has he done? But the chants swell, surging like a wave. Crucify him. Crucify him. Pilate looks to the side. His wife stands at the palace entrance, her face pale. Her voice had trembled when she sent word to him earlier. Have nothing to do with that righteous man, for I have suffered much in a dream because of him. But the crowd is out of control. If he resists, there will be a riot. Pilate clenches his jaw. His hands curl into fists. He calls for water. A servant rushes forward, pouring it into a bronze basin. Pilate dips his hands in, letting the cool water run over them. Then he lifts them for all to see. I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves. The crowd roars in victory. Jesus is pulled away. The chains on Barabbas fall loose. He stares, almost disbelieving, as the guards shove him forward. He steps into the crowd, free, and Jesus, the innocent one, is led toward his execution. The courtyard of the Roman garrison reeks of sweat, iron, and death. Soldiers gather, some watching, some indifferent. The sound of chains clanking echoes off the stone walls as Jesus is dragged forward, his wrists bound to a wooden post. A Roman centurion steps forward, his armor gleaming in the pale morning light. He nods to the two executioners, men who had done this countless times, their faces hard, their eyes void of pity. One of them steps aside and lifts the flagrum, a whip of leather strands, each tipped with shards of bone and metal. He runs his fingers over the sharp edges, then glances at Jesus. He doesn't beg. He doesn't fight. He simply stands, his body weary but unwavering. The executioner smirks. The whip rises. And then it strikes. A sickening crack fills the air. Flesh rips. Blood splatters against the stone. Jesus lurches forward, his breath forced from his lungs. The whip rises again. Another strike. Another tear. Skin shredded. Blood pooling. The watching soldiers exchange glances, some grinning, some merely bored. A few count each lash under their breath. 5, 10, 15. The executioners take turns, one striking, the other catching his breath. The flagrum is merciless, burrowing into flesh before tearing it away. 20, 25. Jesus' body trembles, but he does not scream. He gasps, groans, his knees buckling, but he does not cry out. 30. The soldiers grow quiet now. Even the most hardened among them can see the raw wounds, the exposed muscle, the blood flowing like a river. Finally, the lashes stop. Jesus collapses against the post, his breath ragged. His back is no longer just a back. It is a canvas of agony, torn beyond recognition. A soldier steps forward, wiping the sweat from his brow. He glances at his comrades and grins. Let's make him a king. The others laugh. A twisted crown is brought forth, woven from thick, thorny branches. One soldier grabs Jesus by the hair, yanking his head up. Another presses the crown onto his scalp. The thorns dig deep. Blood spills down his face. A scarlet robe is draped over his raw shoulders. A reed is forced into his hand like a scepter. "Hail, King of the Jews!" they mock, bowing in exaggerated reverence. One of them spits in his face. Another strikes him with the reed. The soldiers laugh, but the earth does not. The sky is watching. The heavens hold their breath. And Jesus, the true king, stands in silence. The air is thick with the smell of blood and dust. The soldiers shove Jesus forward, out of the courtyard, into the streets of Jerusalem. The scarlet robe clings to his raw back, soaking in the blood from the lashes. A heavy wooden beam is brought forth. The executioners lift it, splinters catching the morning light. It is rough, unyielding, a burden meant for the guilty. "Pick it up," one soldier growls. Jesus stares at the beam. His breath is shallow. His body trembles, but he kneels, his fingers brushing against the wood. Then he lifts it. The weight crashes onto his torn shoulders. He staggers but does not fall. Yet a Roman centurion gives the order. "Move!" The procession begins. The narrow streets are lined with people, some jeering, some whispering. Mothers clutch their children. Men spit on the ground as he passes. Others watch in silence, their faces unreadable. The cross drags against the dirt, kicking up dust. Jesus stumbles. His knees hit the stone. The crowd gasps. A soldier yanks him up by the arm. He takes another step, and another. Then he collapses again. A soldier curses under his breath. They need to get to Golgotha before noon. His eyes scan the crowd and land on a man, a foreigner, a passerby, strong-built. "You, come here." Simon of Cyrene freezes. His heart pounds. The soldier grabs his arm and yanks him forward. Carry it. He hesitates. He has nothing to do with this man, this execution. But the look in Jesus' eyes, there is no hate, no anger, just exhaustion, just sorrow. Simon moves to the beam and lifts it onto his own back. The wood is heavy. He stumbles under its weight. Jesus meets his eyes. No words are spoken, but something in Simon's life will never be the same. The march to Golgotha continues. The sun climbs higher, but its warmth does not reach Golgotha, the place of the skull looms, a barren hill outside the city walls, a place of death and suffering. The crowd gathers, pressing close, waiting. Some are here for blood, others out of duty. A few in silent agony because they love him. The soldiers waste no time. They strip Jesus of the blood-soaked robe, reopening wounds that had barely begun to clot. The air is filled with muffled gasps, the sharp intake of breath from those who dare to watch. Jesus is thrown onto the wooden cross, his torn back pressing against the rough grain. The executioners work quickly, their hands practiced, indifferent. A soldier kneels beside him, placing the first nail against his wrist. He grips the hammer. Then, the first strike. A sickening crack echoes through the air. Jesus' body jerks. His fingers twitch as the nail pierces through muscle, tendon, bone. A strangled gasp escapes his lips, but he does not cry out. Another strike. The nail sinks deeper. Mary flinches. Her hands tremble, gripping her cloak as if it could shield her from the horror before her. John, beside her, clenches his jaw, his knuckles white. The second nail. The hammer rises again. Another blow. The sound of metal splitting flesh. The cross is lifted. Jesus dangles, his weight pulling against the nails. His body trembles, every breath in agony. The crowd watches, some jeering, others silent. A few turn away, unable to bear it. The soldiers drive one last nail through his feet. The wood splinters. Blood spills down the beam. Then they step back. Jesus hangs between heaven and earth. The sky is watching. The heavens remain silent. The cross stands tall, planted deep into the rocky earth. Jesus hangs there, his body trembling from exhaustion and pain. Each breath is a battle, each movement sending fresh waves of agony through his torn flesh. Below him, the soldiers divide his garments, gambling for his clothing with crude laughter. The crowd is restless. Some scoff, shaking their heads. He saved others, but he cannot save himself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross. The chief priests and elders smirk, their victory all but assured. He trusted in God. Let God deliver him now. The insults rain down like stones. But Jesus does not answer them. Instead, he lifts his gaze toward the sky, toward the Father. His lips part, cracked and dry, and he speaks. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. The words fall like quiet thunder, shaking the unseen. A Roman centurion pauses, his brow furrowing. He has witnessed countless crucifixions, heard curses and cries of hatred from dying men. But never this, never mercy. The soldiers ignore him, too busy casting lots, too busy fulfilling prophecy without realizing it. The crowd shifts, murmuring. Some mock him louder. Others, for the first time, grow uneasy. But Jesus says nothing more. His arms remain stretched wide. His blood drips onto the thirsty earth, and the sky grows darker still. The wind picks up. The sky, once bright, begins to dim, the sun veiled behind thickening clouds. The crowd murmurs, shifting uneasily. On either side of Jesus, two criminals hang, condemned to die, their bodies already trembling from pain. One of them, his face twisted with anger, spits toward Jesus. Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us. His words are filled with venom, his voice strained from pain. He writhes against the nails, but his defiance does nothing to ease his suffering. The other thief turns his head, his breathing labored. Blood drips from his temple, his vision blurred, but his heart sees clearly. Do you not fear God? He rasps, his voice hoarse. The first thief scoffs but does not answer. The repentant thief exhales sharply, his lungs burning. He swallows, staring at the man between them. "We are punished justly," he continues, gasping for air. "We are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." Jesus, silent in his suffering, watches him. The thief licks his cracked lips, his voice now trembling, not from pain, but from something deeper. "Hope, Jesus," he whispers, "remember me when you come into your kingdom." The words hang in the air, fragile yet powerful. And then Jesus speaks. His voice is soft, yet filled with an authority no earthly king possesses. "Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." The thief exhales, his body relaxing. The pain is still there, but something else fills him now. Peace. The first thief scowls, turning his face away. The crowd continues to mock. The soldiers remain indifferent, but the repentant thief, he closes his eyes and waits for paradise. The hours drag on. The sun, now hidden behind an ominous sky, casts an eerie shadow over Golgotha. The heat of the day has faded, but the air is suffocating. Beneath the cross, a small group remains. The crowd has begun to thin, some growing weary, others unsettled by the unnatural darkness creeping over the land. But these few refuse to leave. Mary, the mother of Jesus, stands trembling. Her veil clings to her tear-streaked face as she gazes up at her son. Her son, the child she once cradled in her arms. The boy who played in the streets of Nazareth, who marveled at the stars, who spoke words of wisdom beyond his years. The man who healed the sick, who brought the dead to life, who is now dying before her eyes. John, the disciple whom Jesus loved, stands beside her. His jaw is clenched, his hands curled into fists, but he does not leave her side. Jesus lifts his head with effort. His eyes, heavy with pain, find her in the crowd. A lump rises in John's throat. Then, through ragged breaths, Jesus speaks. "Woman, behold your son." Mary's breath catches. She looks at John. Then his gaze shifts to John. "Behold your mother." John understands. Even in his suffering, Jesus is thinking of her, ensuring she is not left alone. John nods, stepping closer to Mary. From that moment on, the disciple took her into his home. Mary does not move. She does not look away. Her heart is breaking, but she will not leave him. She will stay until the very end. The hours drag on. The darkness remains, thick and heavy, wrapping the earth in silence. Jesus' body trembles. Each breath is a battle, every movement a fresh wave of agony. The weight of his own body pulls against the nails, pressing on his lungs, suffocating him slowly. The crowd is quieter now. The mocking voices have faded. Some stare at the sky, unsettled by the unnatural night. Others whisper among themselves, shifting on uneasy feet. Even the religious leaders, once smug in their victory, now glance nervously at the heavens. Something is happening, something they do not understand. And then, a cry pierces the silence. "Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani?" The words ring out across Golgotha, raw and broken. My God, why have you forsaken me?" A shudder passes through the crowd. Some look at each other in confusion. "He's calling for Elijah," someone mutters. A soldier grabs a sponge, dipping it in sour wine, lifting it to Jesus' lips on a reed. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him. But Jesus does not call for rescue. This is not a plea for deliverance. This is the moment of separation. The weight of sin, every sin, from the first in Eden to the last yet to come, has been placed upon him. The judgment meant for mankind now rests on him alone. And for the first time, the Son feels what no created being has ever known, the absence of the Father. The light of heaven turns away. The communion he has always known is severed. And he is alone, utterly alone. The Lamb, abandoned. The heavens, silent. The weight of the moment presses upon the earth. The sky remains dark, the air thick and suffocating. Even the wind has stilled, as if all creation holds its breath. Jesus' body is failing. Every labored breath rattles in his chest. His muscles tremble, exhaustion overtaking him. The crowd watches, silent now. Even the mockers have no words left. The centurion grips his spear, his knuckles white. He cannot explain what he is feeling, this unease, this weight in his chest. He watches the dying man, the one they call the Christ, and he wonders. Then Jesus takes one final breath. He lifts his head, his eyes gazing beyond the cross, beyond the suffering, beyond this world. And with a voice filled not with defeat, but with power, he declares, "It is finished." The words echo across the hilltop, carried on the wind. A shudder runs through the earth. The ground beneath their feet begins to tremble. Pebbles rattle. A deep, resounding groan rises from the depths of the land itself. The temple, far away in the city, shakes violently. And then, with an unseen force, the great curtain inside, the veil that separates the Holy of Holies from people, is torn in two, top to bottom. A declaration, a statement from heaven itself. The barrier is broken. The way is open. Back on the hill, the shaking intensifies. Cracks split the earth. Rocks shatter. People cry out, scrambling for footing. Even the soldiers, trained men of war, stumble backward in fear. Then, Jesus exhales one last breath. His head drops, and he is gone.